I named 5 players that if the Jaguars drafted them, would be surprising, but I wouldn't be upset. I'll tell you who they are in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, good people? I'm Tony Wiggins, the host of Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast, where it's your team every day. And we thank you for making us your first listen. A reminder, we are also free on all platforms, wherever you get your podcasts, audio-wise or visual. We're free. Reminding you also to like and subscribe to the YouTube page that is Locked On Jaguars. And we will get off and running. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. All right, we're going to run it down today. 5 guys or 5 players, if the Jaguars drafted them, would be a bit of a surprise, but I would not be upset. Some of these people that I'm going to mention, there are many out here in Jaguar land that think, why would they surprise you? Well, they'll surprise me because of positional value, or they'd surprise me because of the move the Jaguars already made. So it would shock me that they took these people in the first round or with their first pick. Now, that's the caveat. Who's going to be the first player picked for the Jacksonville Jaguars? I don't think they're going to trade out of the first round. But I don't know how the first round is going to go. So if they did, I'm going to name some of those players. First and foremost, to the new members of Locked On Jaguars. If you've been here long enough for me to say that, then you are no longer new. You are a part of the family. So welcome to Locked On Jaguars. This is how we roll, man. Everybody's voice counts. Make sure you leave comments on YouTube, comments on all of the audio outlets, or hit me up on Shop Talking Wig, where I will usually respond. In fact, let me put that information up so it scrolls across the YouTube screen. There you go. I'm not going to wait, man. I'm going to name these 5 players. Number one, the player that I'm naming first is really the motivation for this entire podcast, and that is Alabama defensive back Brian Branch. You say, how could that shock you or surprise you when many people have been mocking him to the Jaguars for a long time, and lots of folks have said that he's great. Even the great Ryan Clark, I saw on my Twitter this morning, Ryan Clark spoke about Brian Branch, and they put it up on Ryan Clark's Twitter about how versatile and how instinctive he is. So from that standpoint, it's not a surprise, but what it does mean is that the player is so good that he trumps traditional, and notice I said traditional, value of the position, as well as usually when a team drafts a guy like Brian Branch. I think Brian Branch is a really good player, right? Here's my problem. I used an analogy the other day on social media, and I'm going to repeat it here. I said drafting for need must feel like going to the grocery store and grocery shopping right after you just ate on a full stomach. You're not as intent on getting the things that you know have value, things that you know at some point you're going to need it. At some point could be as early as tomorrow. No, you say, no, we're fine. We don't need this. We don't need that. So because you're not hungry, you just grab stuff that's on sale. You grab stuff that's just good deals. Or you grab something that you feel like you're going to need within the next 30 minutes, right? You're not hungry, but you might be thirsty. So you might just get too many drinks and put them all in your basket. Whereas when you go to the grocery store not hungry or not full, you have a tendency to get the things that you need for your house, right? So the house that we're talking about right now is the football team that is the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Brian Branch to me represents a guy that plays a position that they're on the field 65% of the time. But if you're drafting a nickel who doesn't play corner, then you're simply drafting a guy who's going to be your nickel, and maybe he'll swing back to safety a year or two from now if you decide to move on from Rayshon Jenkins. And there's no reason why you would do that because Jenkins is playing well. And you sure as hell is not going to move on from Andre Cisco. You don't alternate your safeties as much as you do your corners. But there are times when you do. Some people use a big nickel. So if you're going to use a big nickel, do you use your first pick in the draft? Are you at the point for as a franchise where you use the first pick in the draft on a guy that is just what he is? He's a nickel who can play corner. He can play safety, but he's being advertised as a nickel. It's different if you had a hole at safety and you're drafting a safety who also can slide down the nickel in a minute, because now you have the versatility, because maybe your next best defensive back up, regardless of position in that situation, it ain't a corner. If it's a guy who's another safety, it's easy to put another safety on the field and tell him, now go play nickel, go play the slot. But to draft simply for that slot position sounds like something that teams who won a Super Bowl or teams who were close to winning a Super Bowl do, not teams that just had their first taste of winning. But would I be upset? Nope, surely wouldn't. I would not be upset 1 minute, because I actually think Brian Branch really can play. And at the end of the day, he still makes the Jaguars better. I want to run through 4 more of 5 guys who I'd be surprised if the Jaguars took them, not because of their talent, not because it's a reach, but because of the way the team is currently constructed. 4 more guys. Brian Branch is number 1. The next 2 guys come from the SEC. They also come from the same team. I'll talk about them in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars, after I let you know that today's sponsor for our show is FanDuel. And I am so happy about that, because I have been a FanDuel supporter and participant for a number of years. And now, since we're at the midway point of the NBA, a little bit past that, it's a good and perfect time to download FanDuel for you, the listener of Locked On Jaguars, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sports app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. It's been very, very easy for me, and I know everything is self-explanatory for you. Even game information. You can get all the game information by just clicking on the individuals, and there it is. A tutorial will tell you how those guys have been playing. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at bigger payouts with the same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Every moment. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, man, we're rolling along here again on Locked On Jaguars, where we are every day because it's your team every day. And of course, as always, we thank you for making us your first listen. All right, so listen. I want to know how the Jaguars are in a position at this point to draft someone that's not like a pivotal starter at a critical position or one of the positions that they call position of value, right? I do think they value the positions, and I do think they do a really, really good job of creating a situation where they're going to make sure that they get guys that are long-term answers here. But I don't want them to jump ahead and start drafting people for just specific things this year. I don't think they're there yet. I think what they have to do is keep drafting the best player available. I think once you win something, then you can start cherry picking, or once you get used to winning a little bit more, you can start cherry picking a little bit more than they have so far. My next two guys are coming from the same school. However, they play different positions. How about Broderick Jones, an offensive tackle out of Georgia, who I view as a left tackle in the NBA, in the NFL. What am I talking about? The NBA. I'm watching the NBA on TV, and that's why I said that. But could Broderick Jones be a guy who can play left guard and then also be a swing tackle? He's not the biggest, most burly and girthiest offensive lineman, but he's a very, very good player. Came from University of Georgia, projects long-term as a left tackle. However, the Jaguars have a left tackle in Cam Robinson, and they also have a left tackle in Walker Little. We're assuming that this is because they did not re-sign Jawan Taylor and that they're going to need another young player to be their swing. I would not have a problem with it, especially if he's going to play left guard while you wait. But this whole, if he can't play guard, he can play tackle, and if he can't play corner, he can play safety. If he can't play this, he can play tight. Things are not are not automatically true. It's not automatically true, and it should not be assumed that just because a guy can play one position that he can play another position that's similar to it. It's just not true. So I'm more or less thinking this way. They're going to need a swing tackle. A young swing tackle in the first round is going to cost you just about as much as an 8-year veteran swing tackle will on the market. But this is a little bit different because you need a swing tackle that can play left or right. But you also are probably, if you don't re-sign Jawan Taylor, you probably need somebody in-house that's going to eventually replace Cam Robinson as early as a year from now. And while we think that's automatically Walker Little, I think if you plant Walker Little at right tackle, you need to leave him there. Don't have this situation where you're going to play over there, you're going to learn all of the nuances of that position, and then when we feel like it, we're going to move you to the left side. I really like versatility, but I like versatility as a contingency action. I don't like versatility as something that sometimes when you have guys that do multiple things, that means they're not very good at one, and you can cross-train a guy enough that he's not very good. And I know I'm saying that about Broderick Jones, but this is a rookie here. I'm not talking about someone like Walker Little, where you've even heard Doug Peterson say we might be able to play him at left guard too. At some point, they're going to have to settle on where they want all of their players to play. Nolan Smith. Nolan Smith is player number 3. I told you I was going to take 2 players from the same school. I wouldn't hurt my feelings at all if he's their first player, but the first 3 guys I just mentioned now, they're going to have to get them in round 1. They are not going to last till round 2. They can't trade back. Nolan Smith will be a great addition to this team as a pass rusher, as an extra person who can run like the wind. The thing with Nolan Smith is he's about the same size as, and a lot of people are calling him small, right? He's the same size as Devin Lloyd. Check the chart. They're both 6'3", and they're both about 238 pounds. And Devin Lloyd is someone everybody kept saying, move him to the edge. And I was like, no, don't do that. But I think he gives you pop. I think he gives you a third pass rusher. I think not having speed and twitchiness on the edge goes away. He's a little bit under the size threshold that you know that Trent Baalke loves so much. But I think he would be a pick that I would scratch my head. Okay, you're not taking a full-time starter with your first pick. And all of these guys, like for instance, Brian Branch, we assume that he start. The Jags might not, their opponent might not start nickel. Their opponent might say, we're going to run the ball down their throat. They struggle with the run a little bit. If they do that, Brian Branch is sitting on the pine. That's why every time last year when people were talking about go get Brian Burns, I'm like, okay, who are you going to sit? They're not good enough to do that yet. It's good to have depth and it's good to get best player available, but you also have to have a plan. And at least with this plan, you don't have to re-sign Josh Allen after next year because he'll be a free agent. Or you can try to lock him up and trade him. But with that, you at least know you have a guy who already has experience and you already have a sample size of exactly what he can do. So far, Brian Branch, Broderick Jones, and Nolan Smith are the three of the five players that if they took them, I'd be shocked, but I wouldn't be angry. I'll tell you who the rest of them are in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. All right, rolling along third and final segment here on Locked On Jaguars. The question is, or the task is, to find 5 players in this year's draft who, if the Jaguars made them their first pick of the draft, I would be a little bit shocked, but I would not be surprised. And again, the shock doesn't come from, or the potential shock does not come from the lack of talent. It just comes from, based on what they've done in free agency and what they've said they're trying to do, these guys would surprise me. 4, it'll be a pleasant surprise for me because it's Luke Musgrave, the tight end from Oregon State. This is the first one, and this is even risky, that if they want him, I could see them moving back a little. I can't see him moving back beyond number 30 or 31. But Luke Musgrave, he's my favorite tight end in the draft. He is number 1 for me, with Darnell Washington being number 2. And then I go Luke Kincaid. Then I go to Kincaid, Dalton Kincaid, and then for me, I go to Laporta out of Iowa. I'm not really into the mayor thing out of Notre Dame, and the reason why is I just don't like big stiff guys, and I think he's a big stiff guy, even though he's a really big muscular stiff guy. He's just not my cup of tea when it comes to an NFL tight end. So Luke Musgrave, explosive, big, tall, rangy. Is he a good enough blocker to be an inline number 2 when you go to your 2 tight end package, which the Jaguars are in quite a bit? So when they're in a 2 tight end package, that means they won't be in a 3 receiver package unless they don't have a running back on the field. And they have some formations where they don't have a running back on the field, but that means that somebody is sort of an H-back and they're blocking, or the Jaguars are behind and they're trying to catch up and they're going to risk Trevor taking a sack because they feel like he'll get rid of the ball really fast because somebody has to be open if you're sending 5 guys out into the route. In any case, Luke Musgrave automatically becomes a red zone target. He becomes a seam target. And while we think it's a little bit of redundancy when it comes to Evan Ingram, it's not in my book because he's 6'6", and he's not 6'2.5" like Evan Ingram, or 6'3", and he's different. Plus, it wouldn't surprise me one bit again because I think, just like all the 3 guys I've just mentioned, I am really, really high on Luke Musgrave, and I think he is going to be a whale of a player. Last but not least, it's a little bit of shock. Now, I know it's going to surprise lots of people. It's going to surprise a lot of people because no one's going to expect me to say this. It's a guy at Michigan who's 6'3", 337 pounds, and is as strong as an ox, and his name is Mozzie Smith. Since we're naming guys that might not start or might be second fiddle at their position or are just specialists, well, I'm going to name a guy that I believe takes away a handicap that the Jaguars had last year. And that handicap is they just didn't have enough beef on the inside. I don't think they had enough beef on the inside last year. And because of that, they were susceptible to the run, especially if one of their 300-pounders gets hurt. At this point, I know they brought Al Woods in, but I ain't talking about him. It's Foley Fatukasi and, of course, Devon Hamilton. Now, both guys I just mentioned, Devon Hamilton will be a free agent next year. Foley Fatukasi might be a candidate to be a guy that they don't retain after only 2 years of his deal. And what do you know? You can't get enough 337-pound run stuffers who can collapse a pocket and allow your guys behind them to run free. You just can't get enough 22, 23-year-old talented guys that can move people out of the way. And Mozzie Smith is very unique in the respect that while he's a nose, him and Keanu Benton are the two big guys, I believe, of course, outside of Jalen Carter and Khalifa Clancy. But I really believe that after Mozzie Smith, there is a tremendous drop-off. Now, also with Smith, you can probably pick Mozzie Smith at the top of the second round. You can move back and get an extra third-round pick and get him at maybe 34, 35. Okay, on most of the boards that I've seen, that's where he's listed. And that would mean you're just shoring up the middle of your defense, and you're adding another draft pick so you can potentially get another player who can start, and you still have pick number 56. I think if the Jaguars did this, that means that they would have to address the veteran tight end and the veteran tackle position in free agency, as well as nickel. Maybe they want to get people in those positions that they can trust and not have to worry about developing folks if there's not someone sitting there at 24 that they can believe can help them. And at some point, they may say, look, let's just shore up another area and not force that area to be shored up, because Brian Branch, Broderick Jones, and Nolan Smith all have a chance, even Luke Musgrave, all have a chance to be gone before the Jaguars make their selection. So I'd take a player who's a better player at a position that's not necessarily a need now, as opposed to taking a lesser player just because he feels a need for right now, who doesn't have the long-term potential to help me out the way a 6'3", 337-pound nasty defensive tackle does. With the re-signing of Roy Robertson Harris and the fact that sometimes on certain downs they move Trayvon Walker inside, I think the Jaguars still do need to look at a big guy like this, and I think later on in the draft, you just can't find him. There's a kid I like at LSU who's pretty good, and he's also a big guy. The Jags need to make sure that they don't go into last season with only two guys that are really, really big run stuffers, because once Foley Fatukasi got hurt last year, it cost them, and they had to start making a lot of moves to try to get around it. You don't have to get around me here on Locked On Jaguars. Those are my 5 guys that I've named that would surprise me, but I would not be upset. And I'll do more tomorrow here on Locked On Jaguars. Make sure you guys take care of each other, and we'll see you next time here on Locked On Jaguars.